Good morning, Vikings fans. This is Morning Joes, and I am your host, at least for one more week, Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and as of this week, brand new Minnesota sports podcast only website, Purple Territory Radio. Go there. It's not just our stuff, it's about 85% of the Vikings podcasts from around the state. We're adding more Twins, Wild, and Wolf stuff every day. It's pretty cool. Um, here, speaking of being here for another week, I think I think
Oh, I thought you were
officially
gonna say,
Joe is reached his boiling point with my worldview.
I thought
Joe
you were going to
Oberly,
speaking of pretty cool, Joe Oberly, but no, you didn't go there. So
you're getting there. Once you got to get like a leather jacket. Um, Joe is the editor of our little network and apparently is on the floor of the stock exchange getting tips and
sell Wilson,
calls.
sell.
If that's a good segue because apparently if these were the Packers and we owned stock in the team, wink wink, I'd be selling because I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I'm probably the only person in Vikings media that didn't give this draft an A/A plus. We can get into that. I
What
do want
did you
to.
give it?
It's hard to say. I mean,
I
it
could, I
dep-
could, by looking at what you wrote about it, I would say D plus.
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain it this way. I don't understand some of the cognitive dissonance even between guys that write for us that like well, first of all, I'll it's a philosophical thing first. Like people, I think are either. I think I'm arguing different things with different people. I think like Luke Braun, for example, we did a podcast with, Purple Journal podcast for years. He does Locked On Vikings. He essentially told me that you can't grade a draft based on players they didn't take, only on players they did take, which I think is I called it in my article last night the fantasy football effect. Like you only are looking at the players they took, therefore these players are good or were graded high or are a good fit in and of themselves. Therefore, it was a good draft.
Well, of course you can grade it on both, Joe. I
Yeah,
mean,
you can do it on both,
you can
but
do it
I
however
think
you grade it however you want. Maybe that's not how he grades it, but if you want to grade it on players that weren't taken and choices they made, that's the criteria for your grading of it. So what the
well,
hell?
I that's the thing. I think you have to be open with your audience, especially when you're disagreeing with somebody about that. Like my interpretation of the draft is how does it help the team win now and in the future, not necessarily how big of a stud are each one of these players. I think that we've seen with Zimmer and Spielman that they are very good at identifying defensive talent everywhere in the draft and developing that in their system. We've seen the peak of that approach, though. The peak of that was arguably 2017. You could say they had a better roster in 2018 and 2019. You can say, why did those amazing rosters not get over the hump? And then you say, well, we go into this draft with 12 picks. Zimmer's in the last service contract, as is Spielman. Have they learned the lessons of those peak teams, or are they going to use this draft, which ended up having 15 picks, which is just astounding? Another thing I think people are getting lost in with their grades, nationally anyway, and say, should Zimmer be the coach moving forward? Are they going to maybe prioritize the offensive line more than they did before? And I did not see them doing that. The only guard they took was a pick away from Mr. Irrelevant. It was just like really, that's my disappointment. Beyond that, the cognitive dissonance, I guess, is guys like our draft experts saying live on our 6-hour live stream Thursday night that they objectively hated the Justin Jefferson pick, and then they were lukewarm on the Gladney pick. They loved the Ezra Cleveland pick, but somehow guys that hated the first overall pick thought it was a huge reach for a top second tier receiver, a one-dimensional receiver. Somehow are saying this is an A to B plus draft. I don't know. I think
Yeah, that's a little bit, you know, a bit of a stretch. I think I think those things are not uh, they don't go together well. If you don't like the first pick and then you're giving it an A+. I mean, there's 15 players taken, so that gives you a lot of room uh, to make that determination. Probably influences a lot of people. But if you don't like that first pick, which is arguably the most important of the draft, I think that's got to downgrade it a little bit.
yeah, that I mean, I guess I was angry Thursday night especially, and
Mm-hmm.
I was saying things. I mean, I want to give it an F. It's 15 guys. I think a lot of these guys are going to be good to great players on this team slash defense. I just was surprised by a lot of the anger I saw about the Jefferson pick internally, and then also on Vikings Twitter, and then people responding to me saying this was a bad first night with "you're insane." I'm just what? What happened 2 hours ago?
Well,
Everyone was mad. I don't get
are
it.
they the same
For
people, or are you just speaking generally?
Well, I would say Well, actually, it was not Thursday night. It was Friday night because that was after the Cleveland pick. I would say generally, but I have heard mostly that I'm crazy since then, and I've seen almost every.
Oh, you've heard that before then, haven't you? That you're
Well,
crazy.
from doctors and people that like keep showing up with this white jacket, and I'm like, I don't look good in white. The sleeves are too long. uh, but it just seems like there's an overwhelming sense of this was an amazing draft. Like I'm not seeing the same amount of people that didn't like some of those picks, especially early, also saying, well, maybe this. I mean, that having been said, I woke up this morning and saw about 50-50 positive comments on the article I wrote at well, I posted it at like 10:30, 11 o'clock last night, which is a good um, way to segue into this drafts because it explains what I am kind of looking at or my thoughts on everything relatively well.
I
Um,
guess you want me to comment what I think about it?
on the article from last night.
No, the draft.
Yeah.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I was, you can take them pick by pick, and I would have a hard time arriving at an A+. I told you a couple of days ago that I probably give it a B+ because what I saw going in was all these needs. They filled a lot of those needs, maybe not in the order that we wanted them to be filled. I, at some point you have to understand, or not understand, but the way I look at it is all these guys that are eligible for the draft. Yeah, there's differences between the first overall pick and Mr. Irrelevant in their talent and their abilities and how they're going to pan out. But in some cases, they're not that big of difference. And at some point, I think we get worked up over this or that when the differences between some players is not that great. Yes, the offensive line was a huge need in this for this team, but if they're not going to be picking in the top 10 where the great offensive tackles are going to go, I think they still have to do a balancing of best player available and need, and so I think that's what I think they did. I don't know that enough about Jefferson to say. I was kind of lukewarm. I was kind of like I told you, Matt, on him, and I did like Gladney the second pick. It sounds like Cleveland could be a really good offensive tackle, and I think their play for Trent Williams plays into that. It sounds like they were really thinking they were going to get him, and so maybe they didn't make offensive tackle a priority until, which they still should have since he's going to be 32 years old. But then they lost out of him and made a good a save with getting Cleveland, I think. We also heard that they tried to move up in the draft,
Yeah.
and you need two teams to make that happen. Um, all you can hope to do is try. You can't change that in any form or fashion unless you give them 6 picks and make them an offer they can't refuse. But so I would have liked to see more emphasis on the offensive line. You and I have talked about this for years, and I guess I have to defer to the coaches, which I always do, and say they must be thinking something different. They must think Drew Samia is going to step in and take over at guard and be decent. Maybe there's something they saw last year that they can say, okay, we can cut Josh Klein and bring in Samia. Maybe they think that they're going to bring this offensive rookie in to play left tackle and move Riley Reef over it. Maybe that's their plan. And if that's their plan, then they're succeeding at it. So there's so many other factors I don't think we know that play into it, because it was not just Zimmer and Spielman. I'm sure the offensive coordinator, Kubiak, was involved in this as well. So, I hear what you're saying. I can't go as I guess, negative on it as you have or concerned. So come on back at me.
Okay, there's a couple things. I'm not upset about tackle. I'm upset about guard. Um, One of the arguments that I had in my article last night that I removed because it was kind of a side thing and I didn't really want to get the ire of the particular person I was responding to, which was um, a writer or slash DJ for a local sports station who's been incredibly rude to almost everybody that works for us. He this last week before the draft went on this long tirade.
I feel slighted he hasn't been rude to me yet. So
Well, it's only a matter of time. Um, he went on this tirade defending Riley Reef and he's showing all these PFF stats as to how there's 40 tackles that are worse than him or were worse in 2019. His run blocking, pass blocking grades, it's Elfline, it's not him, so on and so forth. And so to me, if that's the case and they have Reef under contract for the next 2 seasons, taking a guy in Ezra Cleveland, which I think will end up being a good pick. A lot of people are comparing it favorably to Brian O'Neill, but better. I've heard people say if you don't watch the tape if you compare the two, but I see a lot of the same strengths and weaknesses. Size issues that we were worried about with O'Neill, but then he came into camp having gained like 30 pounds of muscle somehow, and then he's been amazing. But if Reef is good and the problem is left guard, bringing in Cleveland at best just gives you an uptick at left tackle. It doesn't fix left guard unless, like you said, you move Riley Reef to guard, a position that he hasn't played since he was 18, and he's going to be 32. We've seen multiple times in the Zimmer era them doing that, bringing in tackles,
mm-hmm.
moving them to guard, or moving centers to guard instead
With
of
very
drafting
limited
guards.
success. Yeah, yeah.
Outside of Berger, it's all been
Yep.
bad. Remmers never played guard, and he was a disaster. So that's my ire there. I do think that they could have picked up a really good guard in the third, fourth, or fifth round. I mean, this wasn't a guard-heavy draft, but a lot of guards weren't taken early like they were in 2018. There was, I think, 4 taken between Mike Hughes and Brian O'Neill, which at the time everybody said they took a gamble on Hughes because they assumed one of those 4 guys would fall to their second round spot. That didn't happen. That's why they took O'Neill. So it's just, again, I think it's been hubris or Zimmer's inability to not take corners, and that brings me to a second thing you said, which was best player available. I find it hard to believe that in draft after draft after draft, the best player available they have is a corner. This is now with Gladney, um, and
I did say a balance of best player
yeah,
available and need. So
but you could argue like with the Hughes thing that wasn't clearly the biggest need. That must have been best player available or best player available according to Zimmer. With Gladney now though, what is that? including Xavier Rhodes, under Spielman, that's Rhodes, Hughes, Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Gladney. Who am I missing? Mackenzie Alexander, or that are first or second round picks. Then you have Dantzler being a third round pick. That's
I think
seven guys in the
McKenzie was
fifth.
a third, wasn't he?
No, he
I'm
was
not.
a second.
He was okay.
Yeah. Um, they didn't have a third that year, and then they took Willie Beavers in the fourth. That was part of my article last night. That's why I'm so adamant about it. So it just seems like, wow, 15 picks, five of them were defensive backs. That's a third. A third of the first or second round picks under Zimmer have been corners, not just DBs, corners. That's
But wasn't
two
the
starting spots out of 22. That just seems like an overinvestment in a position that we haven't gotten a lot of production out of,
well
considering
what
Zimmer's
they
prowess, so called.
they got gutted at the corner position. Three starters, with two starting corners and their starting nickel cornerback are gone. You
Yeah.
don't think that has a lot more weight to it as far as need? In the draft. I mean, you better be
Yes.
looking at that and try to get
No.
you got to get at least one starter out of your draft.
Of course. Um, but they've been they have a lot more needs, and they filled those needs on the defensive line, for example. But I'm just saying, as a whole, they've overinvested in the cornerback position for limited results. I mean, you have Xavier Rhodes turning down an offer to return, Mackenzie Alexander turning down an offer to return, and so the argument is that yes, there was a need, and we knew Zimmer was going to go corner for sure. But I just think that he in this draft and all of them is focused so heavily on that he's ignored other positions, namely on the other side of the ball, and namely being guard again. And so I thought they've had more success developing defensive players later in the draft than offensive linemen later in the draft. They took two offensive linemen in the sixth and seventh round. One is a tackle that can play guard apparently, and then the guard. Um, they've done that before with you know a, a bunch of guys that haven't made the team, didn't even make the practice squad. So it's that's frustrating in and of itself, but I understand the need at corner, and I do like the picks that they took. It's just this draft feels a lot like every other draft that we've had. I mean, the comparison that I made, which I'll get in that in a second, um, and again, moving Reef to guard is a bad thing, but we should just start out with Justin Jefferson, who um, he ran 583 of the 583 routes he ran in 2019. 575 of those routes were out of the slot because he couldn't handle really the coverage that comes on the outside.
Is that
He
for sure? Is that the take on him that he couldn't handle it, or they just didn't need him to
that's
play there?
I mean, I looked at that last night and they said he just wasn't he didn't handle getting bumped off the line well.
Well, then they're clearly going to move Adam Thielen outside then and make him your slot guy, I guess, because he did perform pretty well in the slot.
but there's the way that Deshaun basically explained it was, and you could look at even on ESPN or NFL Network the little highlight package of him. All of those highlights, he was running free off the line. Just he wasn't getting bumped. He wasn't getting.
Nice.
There's no press coverage. He just would run free because it's a spread offense and it's college. And so Deshaun explained basically that a lot of those guys don't translate to the NFL well because they're going to get bumped off the line by extremely physical guys. And if they couldn't do that in college, how are they going to do that against?
How do you
You
know he
put it
can't do it? Just because if it wasn't there, how do you know he can't?
because that's why they moved him to the inside in the first place.
Oh, okay.
Because he's 6'2". He's not like a little dude. It's just it disrupted his game to the point that they moved him to the inside, and then he played on the best offense in college history, so he had amazing stats.
Yeah.
Um, he isn't by any means, I guess, a bad receiver, but I don't see, like you said, moving Thielen to the outside. I looked at what did the Vikings need most from this draft out of the wide receiver position, or what are they missing most from Diggs, or what will they be missing most? And that's his ability to stretch the field.
Right.
Um, the majority of Thielen's deep balls came from slot or routes ran out of the slot, so it almost felt like a double negative that you're gonna reduce the amount of time that Thielen's in the slot. In 2017 and 2018, Thielen did things statistically that Wes Welker only did once in his entire career in terms of efficiency, deep yards, um, percentages, run out of the slot, touchdowns, so on and so forth. And they're really turning Thielen into a one-dimensional receiver in that regard too, taking away what he does best, taking away what he does best to stretch the field, and bringing in not only one but two slot receivers, and KJ Osborne being the other one. And I feel like maybe that has to be by design, and maybe Kubiak has some sort of something going on, but to use both, they're gonna have to use a lot of four receiver sets, or I joked like a Phil Jacksonian triangle offense with three slot guys. And so that really did factor into my take on the draft because I felt like what happened was, as you alluded to, they tried to trade up. Most people are saying probably to get Jerry Judy. That didn't work. And so there was a mini run on receivers at that point, and it felt a lot like the Treadwell pick,
Mhm.
22-23, where they're like, oh my God, a lot of our guys from the top of our board are gone. Let's go with our next top guy on the board, or
Well,
God forbid, who's the most pro ready when the most people said they could have traded down or drafted somebody else and gotten a lot of the same value day two because there
it
was
all
such a
depends
deep
on what you
wide
say
receiver.
because. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I
Finish
was just
sentence.
gonna say it was a historically deep wide receiver draft. So
But
to use the first pick on a second tier guy was a head scratcher.
well, then I guess it goes to their evaluation of which A, neither of us know, and B, neither does anybody else who's commenting on them because uh, the word is from Spielman, they tried to trade up to get Jefferson. So they clearly saw him as better than a second tier receiver. If they were trying to trade up with him before he fell to them. And I'm not sure if that's something you want to let out if you're the GM because someone you're trying to trade up, you can't make that trade, and then all of a sudden you get lucky and it falls in your
Yeah,
lap. But
what
but
8 picks later.
yeah, so I mean, so clearly their evaluation on him is different, and they have an idea of how they're going to use him, and they have an idea how he's going to fit into their offense, and if you don't think that Pat or Kubiak has some say in this, then I guess I'd have to disagree with you. So I
No,
mean, I
I'm
know,
saying he must if they took two slot guys. That's not by that doesn't make sense to me otherwise. So I guess I have to defer to that. But Spielman's been atrocious drafting receivers in the first or second
yes,
round.
and
So
where are these receivers that he drafted from? Go ahead,
thank you,
get it
thank you.
off your system.
Another
Come on.
SEC receiver that makes a baker's dozen, none of which panned out. But Percy Harvin's thinking about coming back, so maybe I should pump the brakes. Maybe he'll come back and now that the rules on marijuana are laxer and
Yeah,
become
yeah.
everything we ever hoped he'd be.
Percy and Favre are coming back. They're going to get the pieces are all in place again. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. So,
Randy Moss or
uh,
Favre 2.0. It looks like Aaron Rodgers is on the outs in Green
that's
Bay.
right.
So after 2021, woo! I
All I
I
can say is before you go down too far down the road on judging this draft, if I can find it on here somewhere, I dug up. I think like on any draft, you can have your initial analysis, you can have your emotional analysis, you can have whatever analysis you want, but it's all moot, especially in a year when they're not even going to get on the practice field for crying out loud.
mm,
So yeah, we have to look at it 3 years down the road and figure out. I think that's when you can really judge a draft class. And I've, when you want to get to it, if you want to, we can look at 2017 and see how that draft panned out, and because that one's 3 years down the road, and see how we feel about. I don't remember if we knew how we felt at the time of that draft, but we
you
can
know
look
what?
at it
Do you know
now.
what's really funny? That is almost is exactly what I wrote about last night. But
Oh,
I was looking at a different draft, a draft in which they started with an SEC receiver at 23, a corner with their second pick, and a lineman as their third pick.
wow.
That was 2016. You know what's funny? Let's look at some of these grades from 2016, a draft in which I was told I was negative. Crazy, let me talk you off the ledge. They have a plan, so on and so forth. I'm not being super passive aggressive towards you. That was somebody else that was on this podcast who was saying similar things to me on Twitter. So I said, seriously, what is the plan, man? It's been 4 years. I have to know. Okay, Washington Post B plus. New York Daily News A
So,
minus, B
which one?
plus, B
This
A
year? This
A
year?
B B A A. No, I they
This
got
is two
even better grades this year. I'm saying the 2016 draft
oh
got
20.
at the time B plus, A minus, B plus, B minus, A minus, B plus, B, A minus, A. Um, about then I basically looked at some of the things people said about Treadwell, or the first two picks were too good to pass up. There's no way that they don't become solid stars for the Vikings. Treadwell isn't a burner by any stretch, but he doesn't need to be. But the offensive coordinator, I was tricking people into thinking that I was talking about this draft, and then at the end I said, oh, by the way, that was 2016, not 2020.
Wow.
Here's what people said at the time. All drafts are different, but
And
the
all
idea
draft
is
grades are bogus. If you saw what I tweeted out when everybody was raving about all the Vikings grades, I said, "Oh, will there be a parade then?" So
yeah, it is. I mean, I get why people do it. We need to do it. I get why people think I'm crazy because they think they have popular opinion on their side and they're very excited. The analogy I used was we're especially with what's going on with COVID, we're all like kittens locked in a trunk that just got 15 new shiny balls to play with. I regret using the word balls. Tinsel balls. I use balls again. Um, and so I get why people are like, wow, 15 picks, 12 undrafted free agents, 27 new players. A lot of these guys grade out really great. But I
they had
just don't.
holes to fill. They had depths to fill. So it's a good thing.
But they've had the same holes since
That's
2015.
fine. But I'm just saying the numbers are a good thing. Having 15 picks was
Yes,
good because you need
yeah,
bodies. All right.
exactly. And I do think Spielman especially deserves a lot of credit for amassing that amount of picks. It's great. And I do think that for better or for worse, we're going to look back at this draft in 3 years and say this is either rebuilt another window of opportunity for this team or it didn't. Um, and so, yeah, I essentially then just looked at people that regraded the 2016 draft, and it was F for Treadwell, A for Mackenzie Alexander, although I think that would have changed after this season because these grades were from 2019, and then F for Willie Beavers. So
Yeah.
again, pump the brakes on this. Like we don't really know, and that's my point. We
No,
don't
and
even have people to grade at guard because they haven't taken that position yet again, and they
I
didn't
have to
need to.
read your story. I have to read your story. Sounds interesting because I went back and looked at 2017 just as 3 years ago. It's the number I've always chosen. That we'll look at it 3 years down the road. And they took Dalvin Cook, a
Hmm.
Pat Elfine, a second pick, a third rounder. You can't give him much better than a D plus right now. Jaleel
Unfortunately,
Johnson, Ben Gideon. Those are their first four picks. And they picked 11 picks in that draft. Six of them are still on the team. Those four plus Danny Isadora and Ifidi Ojdijimbija, or
oh
however his
yeah,
name. So those are the six guys that
Adenabo.
remain. And Adenabo, yes, thank you. Uh, and let's see, they took a guard in round five, Danny Isadora, who might be playing this year.
Yeah,
So
no
I don't know.
first round pick in that draft.
Yeah, that's a pretty dang good pretty good draft. I think if you can get almost over 50% of those guys. I mean, we're gone are Rodney Adams, Stacy Coley, Jack Toko, Elijah Lee.
Who was their second pick?
Your second pick was
Elfline.
Elfline. Yeah.
Yeah.
And third
Do you
was
really
Julio
think that's a
Johnson.
good draft, though? I mean, outside of Dalvin Cook, it's a bunch of backups and a guy who's going to be off the team or benched in Elfline.
Well,
I
Gideon was a
mean,
starter until they started, not even, when they started going to the nickel on first down. He was a starter. I think it's okay. I think I guess I would give it now in retrospect a B minus.
Dalvin Cook is an amazing pick.
Yep.
And any draft, especially if you get him in the second round, when you could argue looking back, he should have been a top 10 pick. Um, Not at the time, but I'm just you get what I'm saying in terms of
Yep.
output. I could see it. You know how I am about Big Ten guys and how big I was on Elfline moving from center to guard, and I thought that what the Bradbury pick was genius because of that, because it theoretically improved two positions in need, and so I've been extremely disappointed by that. You know
But you
why
can't
I,
you
I like
can't be
Gideon.
disappointed on the draft on that. You have to be disappointed on how it panned out. I mean,
Yes,
yeah, I mean because and you have to take into consideration that's a third rounder for the line. That's Brian O'Neill was a second round, third rounder maybe, and then
second rounder.
second rounder, and Bradbury was a second rounder. That's you can't spend your whole time on the line. You've always got all kinds of other needs to fill. So
Yeah, but those are always tackles and centers. And if your argument is they can't spend all that time on a five-man position group, why are they spending so much time on a two-man position group in
three,
corner,
three, three
nickel?
man. Yep.
Yeah, I guess well, yeah, three by my definition. I was thinking two different types, but then there's only three different types in the offensive line, so I'm not as smart as I think I am. Um,
That's a good point, though. No, that you make a good point. You do have five starting spots there that they have to be concerned about, and tackle is every bit as important as the quarterback. Left tackle. Yeah, there's
yeah,
no question about it. Not every bit, but gal darn close. Yeah, I don't know. You dove into the draft more than I had, so you know some of these players more, and I guess I'd like to hear you opine a little bit on you know you said that you can judge a draft on who they didn't take. Give me a few names they should have taken, and then in 3 years we'll see. Because I said to you, the whole Treadwell versus Michael Thomas. Oh my God! I mean, a person doesn't need to go any further than that to say there is a huge swing and a miss.
yeah.
You
So,
get an all-world player and a guy that is probably going to be out of the league this year. So
um,
were there some that come to mind? I mean, were
well,
you thinking another lineman instead of uh, a particular lineman instead of Jefferson? Is that what you had in mind, or the
no,
court?
I would have, like I said, I would have taken a guard in the later rounds, third, fourth, or fifth. I liked a lot of these guys, to be honest. I mean, sometimes it's hard to say because a lot of undersized tackles get moved to guard. I liked Munford a lot from Ohio State. Obviously, a bigger dude, 6'6", like 320. Um,
I would argue that
he was a fifth round pick, I think, maybe a fourth round pick. He was projected to go like in the third. Um, there were other
are you
guys.
happy with Ezra Cleveland? Are you happy with it? Because
Yes.
tackle is a huge concern for this. I mean, and I think tackles are more important than guards. They're not quite as important. Uh,
Um, well, it depends. I mean, I don't know how to feel about Riley Reef because I mean I do see a lot of the PFF grades and the like, and I wrote about this a little bit, but I don't. From an eye test perspective, it just doesn't seem like he's doing the things people are saying he is. But maybe that's because he's been playing next to a D plus guy, as you said, an Elf Lion, and an F minus guy in Tom Compton. So it's hard to really fault him for that. And so for me, I think a lot of people that were looking at my chagrin about the draft were saying we just got another Brian O'Neill. Like, why aren't you happy about that? And that assumes a lot because Brian O'Neill was an undersized guy weight wise. He lacked power. He came into rookie minicamp or whatever having gained like 30 pounds of muscle, and it was this huge like surprise. And he really has been amazing. I don't think you can bank on that. So I don't think Ezra Cleveland contributes this year unless he does something similar, which would be again to add a ton of muscle, add a ton of strength. I mean,
I think they like him because of their way they have that mobile offensive line is what they're looking for,
yeah,
and Kubiak likes that, and I think they see him as someone to fit right into that on the other side. Now, granted, that's your blind side, so you also want him to be someone who's strong, like you just said. He probably does need to put on some muscle, but I do end up thinking he'll be starting this year just because there's too many glaring holes, and they're
Do you
gonna
think
rejigger that thing.
do you think that Reef is one of those holes?
I
Oh,
don't think so. I think he's a solid enough player, and given his dead cap hit, they're going to keep him around, and they're either going to try him at guard or try Cleveland at guard or something. And I think they're just going to have to get real creative there because you want to get your best players on the field. Now, you've made the point earlier, and it's a point well taken that they've moved guards to or tackles to guards and vice versa, and it's not really worked out very well. So I don't know. They're supposed to have a great offensive line coach in there that I can't even think of his name right now, but Kubiak's buddy and
Dennison,
Dennison,
and
yes,
then they brought in Phil Rauscher, who is like a co-assistant offensive lineman coach.
right.
Um,
So
I
maybe
will.
that's what they got more in mind to do more of that, and yay if it works out, but the track record hasn't been good for that, so I don't know.
I'm not as high on Cleveland as others, and I'll say why. Um, Another weird kind of cognitive dissonance thing. The fellas on the live stream were enamored by that pick, and I think what they said at the time, in the live chat, not the live stream, was I feel better about the first round now because they got a guy who, by all intents and purposes, should have been taken higher, even though my understanding was he was really boosted up in mock drafts and stuff because of like his physicality, his speed, not
Yeah, he picked up some in the late days coming up to the draft. He started climbing, didn't he?
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
yes, because he had like a three cone and shuttle drill that was as good as the Henry Ruggs, the receiver that got taken first overall,
Mm.
like exactly the same. Like that's which is insane. But that doesn't mean that he was a first rounder that fell. That means that he was a later round guy that went higher. So I didn't see that. But that wasn't my point. My point was, Deshaun was talking about how because he played in the Mountain West Conference, he didn't play against a lot of the premier or any premier pass rushing edge guys in college. And so when I see things in his draft profile of ball being not good at speed to power blocking, like he gets overpowered uh, on a frequent basis.
Hmm.
And knowing that, again, he wasn't going against Big Ten or SEC edge guys. He was going against Mountain West edge guys slash future car salesman. I think that can be corrected with size and muscle, but that's a concern that I had. But
I'll
still,
agree with
I
you.
give it a B plus over an A
I
minus.
I saw some film on him since after he was drafted. Some people have posted, plays and stuff, and they're showing him as examples of him doing well. And I haven't been overly impressed. I'm sorry to say. I saw some of the film on some of the linemen taken before him in the draft while I was watching it, and I said, "Oh my God, the guy's a road gritter, just throwing bodies around." And I said, "That's who you want. That's the guy you want." And so comparatively, I was just kind of going, where are those kind of clips of Ezra Cleveland, throwing bodies around?
Yeah,
Obviously, it's not the kind of guy he is. So I think you're right. They're going to have to build him up a little bit in muscle and power in order to man that position. I don't think it can all be technique. You've got to have both. So he's going to probably have to develop a little. But I still think, given the straits that this team is in on the offensive line, that there's going to be some young guys stepping up this year, and he's probably going to be one of them.
Yeah, let me so I wrote a three-part, now four-part response to basically what a lot of people were saying to me um
On the chat, on the comment
oh
section.
yeah, on Twitter. Sorry. And I wanted to share a eye-opening stat from 2019. Um Here's a quick run through. I won't. Well, yeah, I will. Okay. So Josh Klein missed 3 games in 2019 due to,
Concussions.
yes. So I'm gonna go through the average yards per carry for Dalvin Cook.
I think I saw this in your article.
Okay.
Yeah.
Falcons 5.3, Packers 7.7, Raiders 6.9, Bears 2.5. That's the first game he missed.
These are
Giants.
these are the games. Oh, the first ones are him playing, and then the
Yep.
okay.
So the first game he missed was the Bears, 2.5 yards per carry.
Yeah.
Giants, he played again, 6.3. Missed the next game, which was the Eagles, 2.6. The next game's 5.7, 4.3, 3.4, 3.7, 2.4. The Broncos. I'll let you guess which one of those Klein missed. So a lot of people are saying, pump the brakes. They'll bring back Klein. I really hope they do. I'm also not sure. I don't know. I mean, it was such a weird um, amount of money to cut him over, you know?
Yes, totally agree.
Um,
And obviously, maybe their plans during the draft didn't work out, and they had a little lifeline attached to them because you make a good point. Now, granted, the Bears have a pretty good defense too, so well, even if Klein would have been in there, I don't think Dalvin's numbers would have been much higher than that. But that's beside the point. I agree with you. Why did they, for that little money, why cut him? And so hopefully they do bring him back, as they need him not only from his ability but from his veteran influence in that room. So
and I had a brain fart earlier talking about guards. I was thinking about some of the guards I was hoping they would take next year. I liked Bredesen out of Michigan, who they could have
Big
gotten
Ten,
late. John Runyon out of Michigan, Jonah
Big Ten.
Jackson. Um, but he's like Robert Hunt out of LSU would have been fine. I forget where
Oh,
he got drafted. Um, but he's a bigger guy.
yeah.
Um,
I
so
agree with you. I agree with you on your overall premise that they let the guard hole slip. That priority, what really slipped down the draft for a little bit too far. But
and I mean, the part three of my article was the if not X then who argument, and so I looked at the Hughes draft because that seems like the most egregious time that Zimmer took a corner when we had 3 starters pegged in at all 3 of those positions, and there were 5 linemen taken between Hughes and O'Neal, 4 of which ended up being guards, 3 of which have started all 32 games so far in their career, one of which in Will Hernandez, who was on the all rookie team and who has been astounding. And so 3 of those guys were obviously plug and play first year guys. The fourth guy has moved around on the Bears offensive line due to injury and just ineptitude. So there are people there. Um, but again, you didn't need to use the Jefferson pick for that. I do think they could have traded down. I was a big proponent of Denzel Mims just because he fits more of the mold of an outside guy. He has the long stride like Randy Moss. He
so why
was
did he
Mike
drop so far?
Mims.
Yeah,
He was always projected to be anywhere between a first or a third round guy. Teams were all over the place with him. Um, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not.
character.
Maybe. I mean, we had Tyson before the draft on Thursday night, and he said Mims was his guy, but you could wait till the second round. I don't think he's entire. entirely polished. I know that he didn't run very complex routes, and he was going to need a lot of coaching in regards to route running, but that is physicality, speed, ability to get behind DBs, his catch radius, his body control. If he's some of the catches he made on the sideline while running full speed were reminiscent of Carter or Moss. Granted, you have to get 1 foot in, not two in college, but he could have stretched the field more so than I think these other guys can. But not to be totally a Big Ten guy, but if you're gonna go slot, they could have gone KJ Hamler out of Penn State, who ran like a 4.2, could line up on the outside despite being around 5'10", and who just is an absolute burner. Neither of these guys are burners, so they seem like possession guys at best, maybe really good possession guys, but I don't see outside of the punt return ability of Osborne why you would go that route with both of those guys. Outside of that, we're gonna have a lot to chew on for the weeks to come. So I mean, we can talk about Gladney and Dantzler moving forward in shows. We can talk about some of the other stuff, but I wanted to finish by getting your thoughts on what happened and is happening in Green Bay. It seems like,
It's delicious.
isn't it? It's
I
so
hope
sweet.
so.
It's got to be
And,
bad for us.
and yeah, I mean, but there's so much out about it now. You think like, uh, what's his name? Rogers is going to be smart enough to pull his head out of his tailpipe and really be a mentor and the good soldier with all this, because there's so much out there now about them taking love and the repeat of the Varv thing and all that. You know, I think it's a nice, fun story to talk about, which is why we're doing it here. But I think Rogers is a professional, and he'll be able to, perform and show them. Maybe he'll have a chip on his shoulder. Maybe he'll be even better as a result of it. So,
Well, I know this is all speculation, but last year when they hired LaFleur, we talked about reports really early coming out of Green Bay that they
yeah,
weren't
yeah.
getting along, and then we kind of said that was, noise, and that didn't seem to be the case. Um, and now I'm seeing reports that this was a sign for that LaFleur was over. Rodgers' poutiness or just the way that he conducts himself. So just for the sake of speculation or content, what do you think the issue is there? Do you think there is one, or that Rodgers is just getting older and his production isn't as good, and that Love can sit behind him for a year or two and learn from him and then whatever? Or do you think that this was a signal, a pretty strong one to Rodgers? I guess not to ship up or shape up or ship out because they took the player, they just like threatened to. Um, but I mean, what do you make of it in that regard? Why do you,
Well,
from
I know
what we
that
can see?
you've talked at the end of last year how you thought he had really taken a step back, and that all of a sudden got a lot of steam. And he has suffered injuries. That's part of it. I've talked to some people I know that say that there's also the fact that here's a guy who maybe his body's not cashing the checks, his mind has been writing, where he used to be able to zip the ball in wherever he wanted it, on the
Yeah.
run and now he's a little bit older. I think he's going to be 34, I believe,
No,
and
he's gonna be 37.
30. So cheapers,
I think
yeah.
he's
There's
36. I'll double check.
those, those 3 years he sat on the bench. So
Yeah.
I think you're right. But
Yeah, 37 in December.
so like anybody else, not everybody is Favre, who is at 40 can still has the gun, and so maybe they've seen this is the natural evolution. Father Time is undefeated. He's getting older. They saw some things that the deterioration, and they see him every day, and they know what he's about. And so I don't blame them for drafting a quarterback in the future. and maybe Love is a little bit raw, and so Rodgers is signed for a couple of years, I believe, yet, so he's going to be playing another couple of years, and
Yeah,
that
he
makes
just re-upped his deal because of Cousins, I thought.
yeah, that's 39 or at least, and so at some point they're going to have maybe the same kind of divorce they had with him that they had with Favre. I don't know, but it's fun to see, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
it
and
really
the
is.
fact that they jumped up to get this guy, they must see a lot in him, and you got to know too. LaFleur inherited Rodgers. He's coming in there with his own ego and he wants to have his own team. So here's his quarterback that he's gonna, groom and make for the next 10 years. Remember when Zimmer said that about Bridgewater when he got injured? I thought we were gonna be attached at the hip for the next 10 years, and so I'm sure that's how coaches think. It's you and me. But the thing we do know is if Brady can leave New England
Yeah,
and due to some kind of pissing match, then why not?
anything's possible, I guess. I always kind of thought Belichick would retire after
So did
Brady
I.
left.
I
What
agree.
else do you have to prove? Maybe he wants to prove he can do it, like Kobe without Shaq. Um,
So much ego.
this is a really ridiculous question because it's clearly not going to happen from a contract perspective or any of it. But let's say the Vikings didn't have Cousins and they could this offseason sign Rodgers. Would you want to do it?
I was going to ask you that, so I didn't have to answer it. Uh,
I'll answer it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. One of my prized possessions is
Really?
my Brett Favre jersey, and not even I told my
You,
buddy this at the time, who listens to this show. We can go 2-14. This is 2009. This season, as long as we beat the Packers both times with Favre, that's my Super Bowl. Like just the idea of what it meant, and I think Favre meant more than Rodgers does, like on an emotional level for the Packers, just because they were so bad before then,
yes.
and he was such an emotional player who seemed, as Madden said 50 times every time he covered the Packers, like plays like a kid, and you know, I have a
Maybe
bus.
Rogers. Maybe Rogers would want to do it because then he could tie Favre by beating all 32 teams or some
Yeah,
damn.
I could see it. I mean, I like you said, I did write a lot about how Rodgers wasn't quote unquote Rodgers anymore last year.
Yep.
Um, but I also said Aaron Rodgers at 85% output
That's
is
right.
still pretty damn good. So of course I'd
I'd
want him.
I'd consider it. I sure would. I can't believe you saying that with as much Cousins love as we've heard from you over the years. But
I'm just assuming. I'm not saying one over the
in
other.
2 years, in two.
I'm or like just if Cousins wasn't here or something.
Oh,
But yeah, I mean, I think that if they had Rodgers instead of Cousins in 2018 and 2019, they very well could have won the Super Bowl. I mean,
but
Rodgers was at least very good at evading pressure and extending plays, and he played against a lot of bad or behind a lot of bad lines there. So, yeah, he's obviously way better than
the thing
Cousins.
the thing they say about Rodgers is that he has always his whole career held the ball onto the ball too much,
Yeah.
and um, now he can't do that like he did in that time, and maybe that's one of the things. He's still holding on to the ball and he's paying for it, but he's not he's not able to make the plays that he did because
And
his
it's
skills have deteriorated.
and it sounds like he's extremely risk averse. Like he throws the ball away a lot too, or holds onto the ball waiting for the perfect situation
Correct.
instead of forcing
Correct.
it in. Maybe because consciously or subconsciously he knows he can't zip it in there like he used to, and so that's throwing him off or something. Who knows? I guess we'll find out in 2021 when he
Right.
rocks the purple. I'm totally kidding. But we will be back next week to talk about more draft stuff, news of the week. I do again want to remind people to check out purpleterritoryradio.com. Um, Tons of awesome podcasts on there. Gleaming in the Geek, this one, Realistic Randy, All the Climbing the Pocket Guys, Scrapes and Gorak, One Bar and Lupegus, Load the Box, Locked on Vikings, Odds and Ends with Mike Tice. Just tons of great shows. And another big announcement: we relaunched for real this time about the labor, which was the other flagship podcast for our sites, along with this one. I'm hosting it, unfortunately for the listeners, with the aforementioned Deshaun Vaughn and Kirby O'Connor. So we have some of the X's and O's, some of the analytical stuff tied in with a lot of draft coverage, prospect tracking, and because I'm there, emotional nonsense. Um, so yeah, tune into that. We recorded our first episode on Monday. We live stream via video on that, and then you can just download it as a podcast as well, anywhere you find this show. But this has been Morning Joe's for the 29th of April. I hope everyone is washing their hands, staying safe, and we will tune in with you next time. Score!